This is the ultimate Riverpod tutorial because I tried to explain all the concepts of Riverpod. You're going to see how you can create all the providers using Flutter, but not only that, because you are also going to use some methods like ref.watch, ref.read, and also other things like ref.update with some examples in which you can use them. If you prefer to watch the single videos, I also have the single videos that I have recorded previously, and this one, it is only a big collection of all these videos put together. So right now, inshallah, we want to install Riverpod with Flutter. So you can use Riverpod with Dart only, but in our case, we want to install it with Flutter. So to install it, it's really easy. We have to go into pub.dev. If we want, obviously, we can do it directly with the terminal. And yeah, you have many ways to install it. I'm going to use this most simple way, that is by typing this in your shell, in the folder of your shell. And or you can do it by adding this line to your pubspec.yaml. So okay, let's go into our code, inshallah. So as you can see now, we don't have nothing, and we can copy our the line that we have. We can paste the line that we have copied before, and we can press enter. And with this line, what it does, it says Flutter that we want to add this package here to our pubspec.yaml. And as you can see right now, we have added our package. Or as I said before, you can add it manually, just copying this line and pasting it here, and it should restart. After you save, it should restart and get your package. So here on the main.dart, I have deleted everything. I have created a new stateless widget where I use the material app, scaffold, and the center widget to center this text here, as you can see here. And inside this text, I print a simple variable, an integer called some number that I define right here. And yeah, it is really simple. I print this text with some number and this variable here. And then I have defined the app bar, that it is this bar here, with a list of actions that contains for now the icon button with this icon, that it is this button here. And when it is pressed, it prints you on the console. So if we press it, it will print you. So it is really easy and simple file. So right now we want to take a look at the most easy of providers that Riverpod offers us. And basically the reason why provider offer us multiple Riverpod offer us multiple providers is because they work in many ways, and they have different reasons why we should use one or another. There are some that can be used for more complex scenarios, and some for more easy ones. So the first thing that we should do to start using Riverpod and to start defining our providers is to import, in our case, the Flutter Riverpod package. So we do this Riverpod easily by calling it, so we don't have to call anything from it. We just import the entire Riverpod file, and yeah. So right now we can use our Flutter Riverpod, and the first thing that we should do, that is really important to use it, is to wrap our application with provider scope. So basically, provider scope do all the magic for us. It is not like the previous package that that was provider, that we had to specify the many providers that we had, and if we had multiple ones, we had to use we had to define them all. In this case, we don't have to do all these things. We just have to wrap our application, our main widget with provider scope. So we can delete this here, and we can type provider scope and then child and call our application, our widget, sorry. Here once const, because for the linter. So okay, let's save, and now we can use our provider, because by defining this, we say that the entire root widget, in the entire root widget, we want to use providers. I think that if you want to use provider only of some part of your application, you can define the provider scope on that part. So in our case, we are going to use it on the root, and yeah. So for provider, provider is the most easy of all the providers that we have. So providers are defined globally, but you should not worry, because they are immutable, as it says in the documentation. And for example, it makes the example that defining providers globally, it is like defining functions. So you should not worry about this problem. So to define it globally, we just have to define a global variable. So for example, my provider, and then we can call provider, that, as I said, is the most simple one, and it has a ref parameter, and we should return our the thing that we want. So this is the type of provider that we are defining. As I said, is the most simple one. It has no state, so 0 remains 0. You cannot change it. And there are some use cases where you maybe want this type of value that doesn't change. And ref is used to access other providers, for example, and has informations about providers. And now, inshallah, in a moment, we are going to see how ref works. So yes, now if we want to call my provider, we will get this value here, because it is the value that we have defined. So we are not forced to define the type of value that we are returning, and you can return simple values, for example, like integer or string. It is not like the previous package provider that you had to define a special type. So in order to call our provider, to get our provider, we need a way to get our ref, because we should call a method of this ref object, and we must have this ref. So the most easy way to get this ref object is by calling a consumer widget. For those who don't know, a consumer widget is a simple widget that allow us to access some data of the provider, and you can use this consumer widget even in your stateless widget without any problem. And only that part will update, will change. So for example, if you have multiple widgets, one inside another, only the part with the consumer widget will change. So it's really efficient if you have, for example, a big application and you don't need a lot of changes, but you need changes in a specific part of your application. So it is better to go with a consumer widget without, for example, using other methods that inshallah we're going to see later. So yeah, to define a consumer widget is really easy. First of all, inshallah, we can change this text here, and we can basically transform it to get this value here. So we can go here with our helper thing. We can wrap with widget, and here we can type consumer, and here he doesn't like this because he wants a builder, and the builder it wants a function, so it doesn't get a child, but it wants a function with mainly 3 arguments. Let me first of all wrap this here. Oops, I've done a mistake. Okay, so here we need a build context, and here we have our widget ref. And at the end we have our child, but we don't need it, so we use this syntax here, and it basically means that you don't need this parameter here. So when you see this, it is not like, for example, JavaScript or jQuery that previously some people use it to substitute the this keyword. So it is not like this if you are a web developer. So yeah, here we have our ref, and that's it. Now inshallah we can basically we can use our ref to get our value. So the most easy way is to call watch. There is another way that inshallah we're going to explain later, but for now the thing that you should know is that we can get our value with watch. So let's define an integer. My value is equal ref.watch, and here we need the name of our provider, that in this case is this one, my provider. So Riverpod is really easy, so you don't have to worry. And so the difference between this stable version and the dev version, the one that I have made some tutorials about, is that now you don't have to call the state, but you simply have to define the name of your variable here inside the watch. It will call it. So basically ref.watch, it watches for your provider and watches for any change that will happen. So if you do some changes with your provider, it will update the value, and it will reload everything inside the consumer widget in our case. So a few things to note is that ref.watch watches for changes. So every time you do a change, it will update the value. But in our case, we are using a simple provider that has no state, so we are not able to change it, as I said before. And yeah, so now let's try to call this variable here and see if things work. Oops, I forgot to return. So obviously here you should return your the widget that changes. So as you can see, it works in this way. So if you, for example, change the value inside here, maybe inshallah later we can see it if I remember. And yeah, with the consumer widget, only this part inside here will change if the value here changes, and not the entire stateless or stateful widget. But obviously there are a lot of cases that we need to watch or use watch for the provider on our entire build in some cases, or in other states of the application, for example the init state, etc., in on the stateful widget. And inshallah we are going to see this thing right now. You use the ref to work with widget, to have information or interact with widgets, and this is the thing that we need to work with providers, and it is the same inside our widgets. So to be able to call a provider, or be able to read a provider, or to change his state, we must use this ref. And there are two main ways to get this value is to change our widget. In this case, instead of having a stateless widget or a stateful widget, we need to use a special type of widgets that are defined by the Riverpod package. For example, instead of using the stateless widget, we should use the ConsumerWidget, and instead of using the stateful widget, we should use the ConsumerStatefulWidget. So this is the main difference, because these special widgets will allow us to get this ref object. Yeah, so they basically work the same as the stateless widget. For example, now we can take in consideration this the consumer widget. It works the same as the stateless widget. It only gives us a second parameter ref. So let's change this one with a consumer widget. And as you can see now, it says that we have an error here. The reason is because we have to define the widget ref as the second parameter. As you can see here, we have the build context as the first one and the widget ref as the second one. So obviously the ref here can be used only inside the build, and you will only need it inside the build because it's the most important thing of the stateless widget. Widget ref. Okay. So now here we are able to use our provider to call our provider. So there are many ways to call a provider. Inshallah, for now we are going to see only one, and inshallah when I'm going to explain the StateProvider, I'm going to explain another way. There are a few ways to call a provider, and inshallah right now we are going to see watch, and it is the most easy way to call a provider, and you should always use watch except for some cases that inshallah we are going to see in the future with the StateProvider. And so we can do this by defining, for example, a new variable int my number is equal ref.watch, and we can call our provider, my provider. So just by doing like this, we have called our provider, and when it gets called, we will get our value. So let's see the result. Let's save. So this is our result, and as you can see, it shows the number 0. We can change the number here and save, and we can restart to see our value. So obviously, if you have started from my main example, you should restart your application, because we have defined the provider scope, we have added the package that basically changes everything. So, and as I said before, here with ConsumerWidget, you are using a stateless widget. So you should see this as a stateless widget. The only difference is that you have this reference here. And you should always use the watch whenever possible. And in some cases, you can use other ways that, inshallah, we're going to see in the future. And as I said previously, you call your provider with my provider, and you don't call the state as was on the previous development versions, for example. So just call this, and you will get easily the value that you have defined. In this case, as you can see, we have defined this variable as integer, and it has returned the number 20 as integer without any problem or complaining. As I said before, you can even define multiple providers, second provider, third provider. For example, this one as a string, hey. And you can return them without any problem, and it will not complain that you have providers of different type. My string, my second number. So we can copy, for example, this here, third provider. So here, obviously, it complains because we have to define it as a string. And we can save. Obviously, we have to change to see our number. For example, here, instead of using my number, I'm going to use my string. And maybe here something. Okay, yeah, as you can see now, it prints this value here. It prints something, hey, I am a provider. And as you can see, you can define multiple providers without any problem. Will not have any problem. You don't have to define them here as it was previously with the provider package. So another example that I want to do, since someone asked me on YouTube, is if you have a provider on a different file, how you can call it. So what I have done right now, I have got the third provider, and I have moved it to another file that I called my provider, as you can see right here. It is the same one that I have defined previously. Here I have imported our Riverpod, and yeah, then I have imported the file on my main.dart, the file where the provider is defined, this one here. I have imported it on my main, and here you can call it easily. Since it is a global, you will see it without any problem. So then I have printed my second variable, my second variable here, and yeah, and as you can see, it works. So inshallah, I hope that everything is clear for provider. If you want me to explain other things, please inshallah let me know, but please give me some time because I have too much things to do, and inshallah I try my best to do it. Previously we have seen only how provider works, but in our case provider does not have any state and it doesn't change. So we may want to look into something like the StateProvider, that it is another type of provider, but it has a special property that is the state, and it can change and reflect those changes. Now I have the same code that I had previously. So a simple provider with the value 20. Here a variable that we don't need that, so maybe we can delete it. And here I'm calling the provider with watch, and I get my value, and I print it here into this text widget. And basically here I have an icon button and on the up bar that it is this plus here. And so we can now, instead of provider, we want to use the StateProvider. And another thing that we want to do, for example, is just to change this to 100 maybe. And yes, so right now we want to restart because we are changing the type of our provider. So right now we are getting the value 100, and it is correct. The main breaking, I could say breaking changes, maybe yes. From the previous dev version, the previous one that I had done some tutorials about, is that, for example, previously you had to type state. Right now the documentation is not updated yet, so you will not find these things. So there's just this breaking change that previously you had to type ref.watch, the name of your provider, and the state to get the state. If you typed like this, you would get only the state controller, so the controller of the state. But things have changed in this stable version, and now you just have to call it in this way. You don't have to access the state property. By doing like this, we are getting our value and we are getting an integer. So the type of our value is an integer, and we basically are printing the value here. Now, by using the StateProvider, one thing that we may want to do is to change the state. We can do this by using another method of the ref object that is read. So here we can read our provider as previously, so we can copy the name of our provider, and now we want to change our state. So previously you had to type state and, for example, plus plus. Now you cannot do this anymore, but you should do something like this. So first you should access the state from here, and you will get the controller, and from the controller you can access the state, and you can basically update the value. So yeah, by doing like this, you are accessing the state and you are basically updating the current value. For those who are beginners on programming, it is like with plus plus, it is like if you are doing the current state plus 1. It is like if you are doing like this. So it is only a shortcut to don't write all this stuff, and you do something like this. So as you can see, I have wrote this read here, and read will allow us to read only the value without watching for it. One thing that you have to know that is really important is that with ref.read you are able to read only and not to watch for changes, but you should avoid it as much as you can. Wrote into the documentation, it's not something that I came up with, and basically you should only use ref.read inside callbacks. For example, here on press, this is a callback, and you should use it inside, for example, callbacks, and you should always prefer to use ref.watch instead of using ref.read. One of the reasons is because, for example, if you try to reset the state of your provider with ref.read, it keeps the old state. Instead, with ref.watch, create a new state. So by doing like this, if we restart, now by pressing our button, we can see our changes. The reason why we see the changes updating is simply because we are watching for the value right here. So by using watch, we are watching for the value, and this is the reason why we are able to see the changes updating. So as I said, for example, here you should not use ref.read, and you may think that by using ref.read you optimize your code and it goes faster, but it is not the case, as is reported into the documentation. And there is a way to read only the provider. You can, for example, use only select, or there is another way that we're going to see right now. And for select, I'm going to explain it later, inshallah. And yeah, so the thing is that we can go here and we can access the notifier, and in this way it will give us the controller, so we should access the state. And now let's restart. If you press the plus button, we don't see the things updating. So there are some cases that you may want to change the state, update the state, but not reflect the things to not render the updates. And as you can see, nothing seems to happen. But here we can bring ref.read. Can remove here the state. And now if you restart, as you can see here in the console, it prints the updated state, but it is not rendered on the screen. The last time we have talked about the consumer widget and the StateProvider. So the consumer widget, it is absolutely great, and you should use it when you want to use a stateless widget. In our case right now, we want to see what we can use with provider when we want to use the stateful widget instead of the stateless widget. And as I have showed you and explained you, you should, if you want to use provider inside these widgets, you should use, for example, a consumer widget instead of a stateless widget, and you should use a consumer stateful widget instead of a stateful widget. So right now we want to convert this one right here into a consumer stateful widget. So first, for example, I see that the helper doesn't help in this case, so we can do stateless widget. Okay, and now it doesn't want the widget ref. We can delete it. Okay. And now we can convert to stateful widget. And here, instead of stateful widget, we want the consumer stateful widget. And here, create state, it doesn't want a state, but consumer state. And here it is of type consumer state, obviously. So you should change this one here and the type that it is returned when you are creating the state, and you are all set up. Now we have our fantastic consumer stateful widget. So the reason why you would want a consumer stateful widget is because sometimes you may want to use, for example, the init state, and obviously you don't have access to it with with the stateless widget. And yeah, this is the reason why you want to use it. Or for example, you have dispose, and you can also auto dispose the providers. But if you want to dispose controllers, etc., you may need it right here, the dispose function or the dechange dependencies, and here you are able to. And the difference between the consumer stateful widget and the consumer widget is that, for example, as you can see now, it doesn't give us error, and it is not strange because, as you can see here, we have not defined the widget ref.ref as second parameter, because when using the consumer state, you are having the ref directly, so you have it as a property. It is injected in some way. The only thing that you should know is that you have access to the ref here, or inside here, or inside here. So you always have access to your ref. So maybe you shouldn't use read here, but watch. I only to show you, as I have explained in the previous video. Basically, you have ref.watch, for example, just like you have widget to access, for example, a final variable here, 22, widget.a, and I am able to access it from here because they have this special property, as you have this special widget property. So that's it. Basically, then the consumer widget, the consumer stateful widget, it is exactly as a stateful widget. And as you can see here, we can basically perform the same things. Maybe here we should restart, because we have changed from consumer widget to a consumer stateful widget, so we should restart. So here, for example, we can remove these things here so we can see the changes. Okay. Now, if we press the button, it is working fine. So that's it. This is the consumer stateful widget. You should use it instead of using the stateful widget. And you have this special property. You shouldn't define it as a second parameter here into the build. And you are able to use it anywhere you want, inside the init state, or anywhere you want. And as you can see, it works exactly as I explained before, the consumer widget. And yeah, that's it. The last time we have seen the consumer stateful widget and how it works. Previously, again, we have seen the provider and the state provider, but there is another provider that it is, in my opinion, more important, because it is the one that you will want to use in more cases, in more real scenario cases. These other ones too, don't get me wrong, but this last one, you'll need it if you want to manage complex scenarios. So first of all, let's delete the things that we don't need anymore. Right now, I'm going to remove this consumer stateful widget, and I want only a consumer widget. And here I have to define again the widget ref, as I've explained previously. Okay, so we can delete this one. We don't need it. This one too, and this one too. For now, okay. Okay, right now we are ready to go. So in order to use this last provider, we need to use a state notifier, and the state notifier basically is another package that it basically extends the change notifier, but it adds the immutability thing on it, so you have immutable data and it is better. And this is another topic for maybe another video, inshallah. But for now, you have to know that it is an extension and it is immutable, and basically it is better more if you want to do really complex projects or work with a lot of people. You should think in a immutable manner. So the state notifier with the Riverpod package is already inside, so you don't have to install it, and it have been developed by the same guy, the same one who developed Riverpod, and Provider have developed the state notifier, and it is an amazing package. So we must define a state notifier just like this. And if I am not wrong, I think, because I think that I have already read that if you want to use a change notifier instead of a state notifier, you could do it the same with Riverpod. And yeah, but I really suggest you to think in an immutable way, and it is better. So okay, now let's get into the code. So let's define the class myNotifier extends state notifier. Here we want to define the type of data that we want to return. In our case, we want to return a list of string, and we do this by defining it here. And yes, now we want to use super keyword. So with super, we are simply saying that when we get a new instance of our notifier, we want this empty object to be the first state to be initialized as an empty object. So when we will return the first time, we will get an empty object. And basically here in our case with super, we are defining the initial state of our list. So here we want a method, because with our notifier it is a class, and we want a method. We have a state class that contains the current state of our notifier, and as explained right now, the first state is this one. So our state will be like this. So in this case, in order to change the state, this one here, we want to define some methods, and basically methods are simply function, but when you use them inside a class, you call them as methods. So yeah, we can define this simple method, add string, for example, and here as a parameter we want the name of the string to add, so we can call it string to add, and yes. So inside here we want to change the current state with the new state, and we do this by assigning a new state to the old state. So, and basically here you don't have to push, because you should replace the old state instead of pushing. So if you push, you are doing it wrong, because in the immutable world you should replace the old state instead of changing the current state. It works in this way. And how we could do this? Simply by using You have many ways, but we want to use the spread operator to, first of all, to spread all the values that are present at that moment to the state, and then we want to add our string. So for those who don't know, with this syntax, we are simply saying that anything that it's inside our object, so my list, so here A, B, C, okay. So basically when we do like this, we are simply saying something like, we do something like this. We are saying that we want all these things here outside and spread. I hope that it is clear. And if we have A, B, and C, then everything will be spread into our list, and we will have something like this. And then we can add our string to add. Okay, I hope that this is clear. So if this was our state. So now we want, as I said before, we want to use this syntax here and do like this state. And after the spread and after spreading the state, here we want to add the string that we want to add. So the first time we will have an empty object, so our state will be this one here, and since it is empty, it will not spread anything, and the only thing that will remain is the string to add. In our second example, if we, for example, add a string, when we add this string here, if it is an A, for example, it will see this A here with the spread operator. It will throw everything outside, and we will have something like this. And again, if we have another value inside for the third time, we will have the state, this thing like here. It will spread everything outside with the spread operator, and we will have something like this. So it will spread everything, and then you will have your string, your new string that you want to add. It's really simple. So now we can put this back like this. So thinking in an immutable way means that you should never change the current state, but you should replace the state with a new state. So right now we have defined our notifier and it should work fine. And now we should use our provider to provide this notifier to provide it to us when we need it. So, and we do this as before. Providers are all defined by globals, and as I said before, you don't have to worry because it is not a problem even if they are globals. So here my provider is equal, and here we can use StateNotifierProvider. And here, as always, we need our ref, and we want to return our notifier. So we can type my notifier. So that's it. It is really simple. The name here, you can remember it easily, is just StateNotifier plus provider. And in this way, as far as I know, you are returning a new instance of the my notifier, and in the first case it will return an empty list. So we want now to call our list of strings, and we can do this by defining a final list of string, list of strings is equal, and here we can use ref.watch because we want to watch for this provider. If anything changes, we want to update the widget and re-render the new updated things. So here we type my provider as always, and in this case it will return directly the state. So yes, now the thing that we want to do is to define, for example, a column. So we can put all our the list of our strings, and we want to map them and return a list of widgets instead. And in this case, we can cast this type here to be a list, because in our case, if you type the dot, it doesn't see it as a list. It doesn't know that if it is a list or anything else. So we can type as this here, and here we can use map. String, and here we can return my string. By doing like this, we should have at the end a list of text widgets with inside our string, and we can use the spread operator here. So we can, as I explained before, we can throw all the list of the widgets inside here, or we can basically do like this and type to list. But I prefer the first one. So yes. The last thing that we want to do is that we want to be able to update our list by calling this method here, add string, and add new strings to our notifier. And we do this by using ref.watch, for example, ref.read, sorry, because inside callbacks you should use ref.read, and here my provider.notifier, and we want to call our add string method, and inside here we want to return string, and we can generate a random number just to be super sure that we have a different string every time. We do this by typing random is equal random. We import the math library, and here we can use random.next int and generate some number from 0 to 100. We can save and we can run our application to see the result. So if you don't want to use the random thing, you don't have to. Just to show you that is a different string every time. So it seems that it's running and it should print. Okay, it is working. So as you can see now, every time we type the plus, it updates the state, and it basically every time that we press the button, it calls this function here, it calls our provider, and as I've explained before, here by calling this function here, you get directly the state, and not as previously that in the development version you were able to get the controller and then access the state, but here you are directly accessing the state. So in this case, since in that way you are accessing directly the state, here you have to call my provider and access the notifier, and then you are able to access the methods of your class. In this case, we are accessing addString, where we are passing a string with a random number from 0 to 100. And basically, it goes into this function. And in our first case, we have, as a state, we have an empty object. And then it will add this new string with this random number. And it will see the old state, with throw everything that it is inside the old state to a new list, and inside it will add a new string, and everything will replace the old state. And after doing this, since here we are watching to our for our provider if anything changes, if our state change, so this means that our provider is waiting to see if anything changes, and when thing changes, basically this state here changes, so everything here updates, and it will show us our list with this new value updated. So if you want, we can put a breakpoint here to see what happens. By doing like this, as you can see, we have this string 46 that we currently don't have. This is the old state, and if you are new, I really encourage you to use the debugger to understand your code, because it is a really essential tool that you should understand. And here you can see our old state, that are all the numbers that we have on the screen. And we have 5 numbers, because here we count from 0 to 4, don't forget this. And as you see here, we have, it says 5 items, and then we add this new item. As you can see now, if we press play, everything updates. So that's it. This is how you should use the state notifier with the StateNotifierProvider. I hope that inshallah is everything clear. So let me know if something it is not clear, and inshallah I'm going to do other videos about provider. Don't worry, this is not the last one. In the previous video we have talked about the StateNotifierProvider. This time inshallah we are going to see another method that is really important to know about. We have seen 2 methods, ref.watch and ref.read. First of all, we are going to use the same example of the previous videos, so you may want to start from the example of the previous video. The method that we want to take a look at is called listen. Let me first of all write it, ref.listen. You basically, as you use watch or as you use read, you basically call the ref object, and here you have access to this listen method. And basically it listens for any change that happens in your provider, on the state on your provider, and when this change happens, it will execute a function, a callback function. And yeah, it is really simple. It is absolutely important to note that you should never call ref.listen inside, as explained in the documentation, asynchronously. For example, inside onPressed, you should never call listen here inside. Or another place that should not call it is inside, for example, the state's life cycles, like in its state. In this case, we don't have a stateful widget. This is a stateless widget. It is a consumer widget, but you should use it instead of the stateless widget to get your ref. When you have a consumer stateful widget, you inside your init state, you should never call ref.listen or other state lifecycle. So here we have our ref.listen. For example, we can call it inside the build. And don't worry, even if it is inside a build and you are using a consumer stateful widget, it will get called only the first time. So your function will not execute every time. So you shouldn't worry about this. It is important to note that you can call it inside the build. Another place that you can call it inside other providers. For example, if I have here StateNotifierProvider, I can do something like this. Here I return, and maybe I can call it here and do some stuff that I may need. I don't know what. Okay, so yeah, so basically you have ref.listen, and as the first argument, as I have explained, are two positional arguments. The first one is your provider, for example, my provider. You shouldn't pass the state or the controller. You have to call directly your provider. As a second argument, you should pass a callback function with two values. And for example, in our case, as you see here in this example, we have a list of strings. And basically, so the first argument is the previous state, and the next argument is the new state. And inside these two states, we will have, it will return to us a list with the previous state and the next state. So we can define list of prev state or list of new state. So here now it gives a problem because it tries to understand the type. It sees that we have a function of type object. It doesn't really understand the type that we will return because we haven't defined it here on the StateNotifierProvider. We have not defined the return type, and we also haven't defined the return type after the listen method. For example, if we delete the type, you will see that it will give error here, because you shouldn't worry, first of all, if you see this error. It is only that it does not understand which type it is, because you should define the type that will return. You can, for example, type dynamic and you will, unquote, solve the problem, but this is not the solution that you should use, because you always should define the return type. And here on the StateNotifierProvider, we can do this by defining here that we have a notifier and that we return a list. And obviously here now we can say that we will have a list, and here you should define the return type of your provider, because at the end your provider contains a list. This is what I have explained before. So at the end, on your state, it contains a list of strings. So it is a list of strings. And here now we can simply type list. This. So even after doing this, we will not solve the problem, because in the first argument, it not only wants a list, but it sometimes can contain a null value, for example, on the first state. So you should insert a list with the question mark for the nullable thing, because if here contains null, you know it, and it will not always contain a list. So finally, after all this talk, we have defined the things that should go into the listen. So I'm sorry, but I try to let people of all backgrounds understand the concept totally, so by trying to explain everything, because sometimes there are people that have no real background in computer science, others that have, and things like that. So yeah, let's continue. And here inside our the body for our function, we can basically, this is the function, the callback function, callback because you pass this function, and every time that the provider changes, this listen method will call this function here. This is why it is called a callback function. Now you can do anything that you want. This function have been called. Hit save. Okay. So now you see that if we press the plus button here, the string changes, and as you can see here, this function have been called. And if we tap again, we see the second time, the third time, etc. And if we stop right here and we press again, we can see the values that we have inside our callback function. And as I said before, we have our previous state that contains only 4 values, but here inside the new state we have 5 values that contains a new value, the number 83. And as you can see here, it doesn't show the number 83 because it is called before it renders everything. But as you can see now here in the new state, you have the new value. So you have the previous state and the new state because sometimes you may need them in order to do some things. It depends on a lot of the cases, but you may need the previous state, you may need to compare it with the new state, etc., etc. You may not want really to show something because the previous state it is similar to the new state. I don't know. You have a lot of cases. Yes, I think that I have said everything. It is also important to note that, for example, in the documentation, it says that a real-world example is when you have you want to show a snack bar. So you listen to changes, then you show a snack bar. As you can see here, we have that, for example, you show a snack bar when an error happens, or you have a lot more cases. I have seen the real example applied in another website of another YouTuber. So let me go and check. And here it is, the example. The website is called with Andrea. It is basically the same implementation, ref.listen with a counter state provider, and you have the previous state and the current state. At the end, it shows the snack bar with the new value. If we press the continue, we could see that things have changed and our print is shown here. So this is how it works, ref.listen. I think that I have said everything. As I have said previously, you shouldn't worry if you have ref.listen here inside the build. Obviously, this applies more with you have the ConsumerStatefulWidget because ref.listen will get called only when something changes inside the provider. If you start your application, you could see that at the beginning, this function will not get called, and here we have our breakpoint. It will not get called at the beginning, but only when something changes in your provider. So if I try, for example, to change something, it will call it right now. So basically what I have done so far is I have created this new class that has 3 simple properties: a name, a model, a color. 2 of them are required. 1 of them has a default value of gray. It is of type color. If we don't set this property, it will be of type color gray. I use this car provider and I assign to it a StateProvider. Here I basically return a car with the 2 required parameters, a name and a model. Here I call my provider with ref.watch. I basically get the state of my value. Then I use the property color and I assign it to this container. So it will get colored in this way, as you can see. And it happens a lot that you may want to use only some property of your class and not all of them. And in this case, I'm using only the color and I'm not using the name and the model. So if you have that case, you should use another way that is given to us by the Riverpod package, and it is called select. You basically, instead of calling your provider directly, you call your provider and then you call a method that is called select. And from here we have our car and we can select one of our properties, and in our case we want the color. And for example, here we can change the type to color, and here we can say car color, and we can copy this one and paste it right here, and everything is fine and everything should be working well. So in this way I'm selecting directly the color and I'm not getting all the other stuff. We can also use the select with the listen method. So we can do ref.listen and the same thing, car provider, .select. And here, for example, we can watch for, I don't know, car and car dot model, for example. And we can pass to it our callback function. And here we have our previous model and our new model. So here we can type something, print our previous model was model and new one is new model. Okay, we are right. So now we can use the button to update our car state, and here I basically use ref.read to read the controller of our provider. For this reason I have called the provider. I have accessed the notifier, because or you should access notifier or state, and it will give you the controller of your provider, and then from the controller you are able to access the state. I get the controller. I have done this only because I want to get the previous value, so instead of accessing it every time, I have done in this way. Here I use the controller. To the state I assigned a new car with the previous name and with the previous model. Here, for example, in this case I changed the color in blue, for example, just to try it out. We can save, I think. I don't know if I have saved. We can press the button. You see that the color changes, but here does not print anything. This is how it's supposed to work, because in our case we are selecting and we are looking only for the model if changes. So let's try to change the model and see if anything changes, because if anything changes we are in trouble. Whatever, any name, I don't care. Now if I press the plus button, okay, I should save. Now if I press the plus button, as you can see that we have our previous model is this one, and this is the new one. As I explained in the previous video, with prev model you have the previous state, and with the new model you have the new one. You may need it in some occasions, for example, to print this message that would be a valid message. You want to inform your user that your previous model or previous anything was different from the new one. This time we are going to talk about modifiers in Riverpod. Basically, modifiers are a simple way to change how we deal with our providers, and the first one that we are going to see now, inshallah, is the modifier family. It is really simple, so don't be scared by the amount of code. I have created a simple enum with a type of number. If it is low, medium or high, basically the type of number that we want to generate with our StateProvider. And here I have created a simple StateProvider. Instead of using the arrow function, I have used the body because I want to do some operations inside. I use the random with the dark matte, so if you don't have it you have to import it. And here I define this private variable with the late, because I want to assign the value later in this occasion after checking with the various if else. Here I define the type that I want, for example low. I will check if the type that I want is equal to low or medium or high. If it is low, it will give me a random number from 0 to 10, if I'm not wrong. I think from 0 to 10, or from 10 to 50, because here I have 40. It will generate a number from 1 to 40, and then I add 10. And here it will give me a random number from 50 to 100. After doing so, I get the number by the type that I have defined. In this case, I have choose low, and since I have choose low, it will compare it right here. It will see that the type that I have choose is low. It will generate this random number here, and it will print it to the screen. Here, when I read the provider, I use watch. I pass it to this variable, and then I show it on the screen, as you can see here. Now, the point is that this is not the best scenario, because usually we don't want to define the type here, but maybe we want to define it here based on some other strange conditions. So the question is how we can pass a parameter from to our StateProvider. So before it generates a random number, we can pass to it something, for example, this type here. This is why we use modifiers. The one that really comes useful in this occasion is the modifier family. We change the way how our StateProvider works just by adding that family, by accessing this method. And now it gives error because we, after the ref, that it is the first parameter, we want to add another one, and here as argument we want to define our type, so we can pass the type somewhere here and then we can use it here inside. So we can do this by, instead of defining our variable here, we can use it as an argument here. We want a type as a parameter of type of number. So here we can basically delete it and we are okay. And as you can see, now it gives error here because now we have this modifier that changes how we deal with our provider. And obviously here we can change it to family just to make it in reality I prefer to type something like family of get random number. So I can call it here. I have the same problem because it will get the ref, but we haven't defined the type. So we do this by calling it simply. So we type here and we can choose, for example, type of number high. We are basically passing one of our enums and it will check here inside. It will go right here and it will generate a number more higher than 50. As a side note, here you can also type like this. Maybe it's better, but I prefer to use all the types. Okay, let's save. As you can see now, we're able to pass a new parameter to our family. We are able to generate a new number. We also have two amazing examples in the documentation. The first one, obviously here you can find it under concepts, modifiers family. Here the first one, it uses FutureProvider. I haven't done a video about FutureProvider because it is a simple provider, but it returns a future, so it is nothing special about it. Basically, under FutureProvider, it uses this modifier family. It passes to it the ID that it adds to when it does the HTTP GET call. Basically, it will return a value based on the different ID that it will pass. So obviously, when it gets called, you call messages family and you pass to it your ID. And another example is by using locales, and obviously as explained here, you can use your family and call multiple times and have different values. So in that case, if I had to call my generate random number another time with another value, I will get the other value. Now it's time to talk about the last modifier, that it is the autoDispose. It is really simple. As the name suggests, autoDispose help you to autodispose the state of your provider. Basically, as you in StateFulWidget, you use the dispose to, maybe if you have some controllers, you remove them, clear them up to clear some space in memory. Basically, with providers, you have some state, and even when you change, for example, pages, the state remain the same. Sometimes you want to dispose that state to have a new state, for example. So let me show you a simple example. Here I have created and imported multiple pages. I have mainly two pages, page 1 and page 2. Then I have defined the routes. That's easy. Page 1 and page 2, initial route, the page 1. Inside the page 1, we don't need this. I simply have a button that it basically calls the page 2. This is what it does. It does nothing special. Inside page 2, I have imported, it is from the previous example, so I always have the random. It is the library to get this random, our provider, so we can use it. And here I define a StateProvider. Here I call this random and I generate a random number from 0 to 100. So when I call ref.watch, I get a random number from 0 to 100 and I show it in the screen. So when I press this button on the second page, I see the number generated. So now if I refresh and press again, I have 50. I didn't like the number 0. So I have 50. Now, if you see, if I go back and I return to my second page, you see that I have always the same number. And if I go back again, and if I try again, because the state is always the same, so here it has the same state. It's an amazing feature because when you return, you don't have to compute again these things, random, etc., but you have the same value. So sometimes, for example, if you want that when you go back to your previous page and you want to dispose your old state, you simply use this modifier. And as I said, it is really easy to use, and modifiers basically change the normal way how our providers work. And you easily type after your StateProvider autoDispose, and then you save and restart, because this, as I explained, changes the way it works. Now, if I go into the second page, it gives me 16, and if I go back and again, it gives me another number. This is really useful, and it basically disposes our provider, and it is even needed if you don't want that state, for example, when you change page or in other occasions. This is a really useful feature that I didn't find into the documentation, but I, alhamdulillah, stumbled upon it and I wanted to share it with you. Basically, I have defined the simple counter that anyone uses when you start with the Riverpod. You know that you start with the counter. This is a StateProvider that starts with 0, and I watch two providers. Also, I want to share another thing. When I do my applications, I always use provider off and I put the name, because it basically, I think that it is better, because instead of every time trying to remember the name of your provider, you just type provider and it will give you all the providers that you have defined, and it is an easy trick that you can use. So yeah, I watch for my provider that at the beginning is 0, since it is a StateProvider. At the beginning is 0. Here I show it, and then by pressing the button we add 1. So one thing that I didn't like at all was to type this thing here, to type ref.read provider of notifier that state and update the state with the same number plus 1. This thing, I didn't like it, because maybe in this occasion it works, or you can do things like this. And it also works, okay? But there are some occasions that you don't want to add 1, but you want to do a lot of other things, other stuff, and you only want to update the previous state with a new state. So what you can do, you basically can use this feature called update. Here with update, you have the previous state and you pass to it the new state +1. So in this case, basically, we get the previous state and we return the new state of the thing that we want. That it doesn't basically need to be +1, but it can be anything that is the new state. And it is a cleaner way, a better way to write our code. So that's it. Sometimes I get this question here, how you can structure your project with Riverpod. And it is structuring your project and architecture is a really big topic for me. I'm not really prepared into it, so I'm still trying to understand and learn more about it. So I'm not going to say that I know I'm good at it. Absolutely not. And I don't want to share something that I don't know really well how to do, because maybe I can show you something that it is wrong and you will use it throughout your project, your life, and so it is a major implication, I would say. So this is the same question that I have done on Reddit 6 months ago. If you want, you can scroll here if I forget to pass the link. And I have done the same question into the Flutter dev. Maybe you can interact with it and you can ask, or I don't know, maybe they can reply to you. And some guys gave me really good advice. I have read, for example, this article is really an amazing article. And even Remy responded, and you can check it out. There are many useful things. I don't want to try to explain what they have said because I fear to not deliver the points that they have made. So I think that is better if you go check it out. And inshallah, if I learn well architecture, I am going to do some videos about it, but for now absolutely not, because I'm not really prepared at all. And I think that architecture is a really big and important topic, and I see that a lot of YouTubers do the mistake of sharing bad architectures or not sharing them at all. For example, doing everything in the same folder, and this also I think that it is a mistake, because probably someone will see that they are doing everything in the same folder, etc., and they'll copy it and think that you should make applications in this way. And also, if you want to learn more about clean architecture, you have here the videos of 𝗧𝗜𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗧𝗘, that it is a really well-known YouTuber, and it has absolutely fantastic YouTube videos. I haven't watched all the videos but I think that I have watched the first part. I don't remember, and it is really great. You can learn a lot of things when watching these videos. It has extensive playlist of that talks about clean architecture, and as far as I remember, it has also other videos, so you can check other videos that it has in his channel, and inshallah, if I remember, I'm going to share it. And yes, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. So today, inshallah, we're going to take a look at the FutureProvider, that it is one of many providers that we have with Riverpod, and it is used, obviously, as the name suggests, to call futures and to get data from futures. So to use it, we are going to use other libraries packages, for example, the HTTP, since we are going to make an HTTP call to this API, and the Dart convert to convert our JSON. So in order to define a future provider, it is just like other providers. You have to use the future provider keyword, and inside you call always the rep. But in this case, you use the async and await keyword, because the HTTP get method returns a future, and this future should be resolved, obviously. After we get our values, we return them. this is how we define our provider. So before I go into the other part, let's take a look at this API when we call it which data we should get. So this is the data that we are going to get, and I did this by calling it on the browser, since it is it uses the get verb. So this is why we see it like this, and I see it formatted in this way because I'm using an extension of Chrome that I don't remember, but if you want I can tell you which one it is, inshallah. Here we have many other informations other than the one that we need, because we want only the fact of the cat and not the other data. Even the length, we don't need that. So here we have current page and other information, last page, links, and here it says, for example, that we have the current page is the one, and there are other pages. As with other providers, we use ref.watch inside a ConsumerWidget, and we call the provider of future facts, that it is this one here. By doing like this, we get our future provider that we can consume by calling some predefined methods. So here I defined a material app, scaffold, safe area, center, default ones that I always define. And here, after the center in the side, I have basically called the future cat facts, and I have used the when method. So when requires three named parameters that are data, loading, and error. So inside the loading, obviously you use the any indicator that can show that you are fetching the data. Since it is a future, you don't know when the API would respond. So in the meanwhile, you can show any progress that shows that you are making some sort of call, and here you show the error if you have any error. When the future completes with your data, it will call the data with your informations, or when it completes with error, it will call this part here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this part here. We get our data, and inside our data we access the body, and it is the part in which we have our JSON, the content of our JSON, but we need to transform it, since it is like if we have some text, and we can't do anything if we have only the text. We need to tell to the application how to treat that data. So this is why we use the JSON.decode, that it is present inside the 𝗙𝗟𝗏𝗏 library. I don't know if it is called library package, that you obviously you find it inside Dart, so you don't have to install anything. And then here we decode the data as JSON, and then we can access it like this. If you want to access it by using the dot notation, I mean like this, you should create some methods. You can use some helper functions like the freeze package, and this is another topic. But basically here then, when we are calling data right here, we are basically getting the informations that are inside here. So we basically are getting our list with the facts. And now the only thing that we need to do is to access our fact. To do so, I have defined a list view with some children's, and I went into the cat fact details that it is this list here. I have used maps to go through each item, and I've created a container with the text that contains the single fact, that it is this one here. So this is simply basically how we can use our FutureProvider to make an HTTP call and get our informations. Today, inshallah, we're going to see stream providers, but I'm going also to show you how you can create your own WebSockets with Node.js, and it is really simple. Into the documentation, if you want to learn more about stream providers, you can go on the left menu, and as you can see under all providers, you have stream provider. You click here. So basically here it says that StreamProvider, it is used to listen to Firebase or WebSockets. Inshallah, today this is what we are going to do. We are going to listen to a WebSocket, and inshallah the part related on how you can create your own WebSocket with Node.js, we are going to see it at the end because it is not the main topic of the discussion, but it is how to use StreamProvider with Riverpod. What are WebSockets? WebSockets are a way that allow us to communicate in both ways, so we can send messages to the server and the server can send messages to the client. And previously they were used other ways, unconventional ways we could say, and they would create a problem. So let's start and go into the main topic. So what we have here, we have two main folders, the client and the server folder. Inside the server we have our WebSocket that we have created with Node, and inside the client we have our client that it is our Flutter application. So right now we can click here because in the first part we are interested in this part here. We have our normal files, and under the pub/spec.yaml it is really important that we add our WebSocket channel so we can communicate with WebSockets. So if you are going to use, for example, Firebase, you can use your own packages, your Firebase packages to communicate. In our case, we are going to use WebSockets. So you can add this package here. We can go ahead into the main. The stream provider works really similar to the Future. It differs a little bit here on when you are creating it, and let me close this one here. And the first thing that we need to do is to import our just installed package, and here we can define our stream provider, and it is really important to use autoDispose because so we prevent our application to use resources that at that moment are not needed. Here you define an async function. Here defines a variable. By the way, this code I copied it exactly from the documentation, so I'm not going to take the merge. I have changed only some things, for example, how you communicate with the socket and the address that you are going to call. So here you call, we are going to call this package here, the WebSocket package, and we are going to call this method here, connect, that will allow us to connect to our WebSocket in this address here. So as you can see here, it is written WS, that means WebSocket. So as far as I know, to connect to your Android, or if you have an Android emulator or an iOS emulator, it differs here, the URL that you are going to use. The port obviously will be the same, but here the URL will be a little bit different. As far as I know, the Android emulator maps this one to the local host. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, basically the local host is that you're talking with your machine, local host, and it is like if you're calling this address here, usually that it is your local machine. With Android it maps it to this here because as far as I know it is a virtual machine or something like this. So, and this is the port because we have defined like this into the WebSocket. Here we close the connection when we dispose, but we don't really interested in this part. Here we are basically sending a message to the WebSocket. So we are sending this specific message, and inshallah I'm going to show you why, but this allows us to go ahead. And then yes, here it gets the stream of data and transform it to string, and we get it back. We don't need this here, I'm sorry. So and okay, and then here we simply call our provider like always with watch, so we can watch for any new stream of data. This is the variable provider of messages, and here as I said previously, it is exactly like a future. It is an async value that it is a special type created, I think, by the Riverpod in the Riverpod package, and you have, as a return, you have data loading or error. And in this way you can clearly define your data when you have the data, or the loading. If it is loading, you can show something that is loading, or you can show something during the error, and you have a clean way to define your informations. And this is works also for the future. I haven't explained it previously, but it works also for the future. And also, if you want to access directly your data, you can type that value and you can access directly your stream without the need to use data loading and error. Maybe you want to use your own try-catch way of doing things. Okay, and then you get these messages, and they get printed out here, and every time the text changes with your new data. Now let's save, and first of all, before running our application, we need to go into the server folder and start our server. We can do this with Yarn because I have used Yarn, but if you prefer, you can change it with npm. Usually you shouldn't mix those two. As you can see here, we have a yarn.log. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, just use Yarn. It is a package manager like npm, like pub, because you do flutter pub add and you add your packages. And here it is the same thing. You can install things, etc. And we can run commands, yarn, in this case yarn start, because I have defined it like this in my file that I'm going to show you inshallah in a moment. So here we can press F5 to start the debugging process. As you can see here, it says that it is running on localhost and the port. Okay, now it is connected. We have some data from the server and it has replied, and now it is running. As you can see, every time changes and everything works fine. So this is how you work with StreamProvider. So now if you want to go ahead, you want to understand how we can create our WebSocket here inside server. This is a simple NodeJS file, really easy. We have a package.json with our defaulting. So this is the file, and the thing that you need, it is nodemon. So maybe if we are going to do any change, it will update automatically, or you can basically change this with Node if you don't want to install this package. But I really suggest you to use nodemon so you can make your changes in the index file easily. So I'm going to show you even how to install it. It is really easy. Yarn global add nodemon. This way it is going to install it globally, and you have nodemon globally. As far as I know, you can also install it locally if you want, but usually it should be installed globally, I think. And in this way you can run it anywhere. Okay, so you can retype yarn start, and yeah, that's it. We don't need any dependency, and we have our WebSocket that it is part of Node. It is an API that is part of Node. And here we require basically our WebSocket package from Node. We save it in a variable. We define a port. By the way, this code I have copied it So because it is I don't care. The most important thing it is that it is working, because it is not my own project. I don't usually copy things. Only, for example, for this example, I have to show you how it works. So it is not the real point of the discussion. So here it uses a simple port, and it calls the WebSocket with the server, and it passes the port. Then here it prints that the WebSocket is running and the port that it gets from this variable here. Let me close this so maybe it's more clear. I'm sorry. So and then here calls the instance of WebSocket server that it is saved here, and it checks. This is a listener that when it has any connection, it saves the current address that it is connected, that it was wait a second, it is this part here, because then it prints it right here with client TP, as you can see. And then it sends a message. In this way you are sending a message from the server to Android emulator. Indeed, if we see, for example, right here, this console refers to Flutter and not this one here. And as you can see here, we have thanks for connecting, because was sent from the server to the client. Now, if we restart, you can see the message, and it is this one here. And then you receive the data. We can delete this thing here. Okay, so and then Pritz sends this message just to show you that you can do a lot of things. And here the WebSocket looks for any message, and when it gets any message here, I basically check that the message, I transform it to string, and they check that the message, it is exactly like this. If it is not, it will return. And this is where here I do channel sync add send something. As you can see here, since the message it is send something, it is going to call the WebSocket instance and check for all the clients that are connected at the moment. So basically, yes, you can connect multiple devices, and it is going to send to all your devices this message or anything that you want to perform. And for each client is doing a simple for each, and for each client is going to check the ready state, if it is open, if it's ready to receive the message, and it basically sends an interval of messages. Basically, every 4 seconds it generates a message from date.now, so the current moment to string. It just to generate a random number, basically, and it sends the message. So this is an interval. That means that every 4 seconds it executes this function. It sends the message from the server to the client. This is why here we see these messages, and we don't see them here. We only see them here with simply using client.send. And that's it. It is a really simple thing. I thought that maybe I can share it with you so you can learn something new, something a little bit different. Maybe you have used only Flutter. You can also try to play a little bit with NodeJS. It is also a really amazing technology. And yeah, so I think that that's it. And inshallah, I hope to see you for the next videos. Thank you so much for watching.